3 minutes. That was all she had been given. 3 minutes to gather what mattered and disappear before the household woke. And Adelaide Cortwin counted them the way a soldier counts the breaths between cannon fire. 1. She folded the letter she had written into thirds. 2. She slid it beneath the silver candle dish where he would find it, but the servants would not. 3. She did not look at the bed. The room was still warm from him. That was the cruel part. The part she had not prepared for in the long hours she had lain awake assembling her exit in the dark. The pillow held the shape of his head. The coverlet held the angle of his shoulder. There was a glass of water on the table he had poured for her hours earlier without asking, the way he always poured it, half full because he had learned she did not like to drink a last swallow of anything when she was tired. Small things. Insufferably small things. She had told herself, before she ever crossed the threshold of Marlbridge House, that she would not notice them. She had told herself a great many sensible things. She had been wrong about most of them. Her boots were already on. Her traveling cloak hung over her arm, folded in the manner her mother had taught her, lining inward so it would not show wear at the seams. Her hair was pinned but not dressed. There had been no time for that, and there would be no one on the road at this hour who cared. She had a single small case at her feet, leather worn pale at the corners, fastened with a strap her father had buckled the last time he had embraced her. Inside it, 2 changes of linen, a comb, a folded map, a packet of papers tied with brown ribbon, and the only object in the world she would not have left behind for a kingdom, which was a thin silver thimble that had belonged to a woman she had never met, and whose name she carried as her middle name, and whose handwriting she had memorized from the margins of a recipe book. That was the inventory of her life. She permitted herself to count it once. Then she did not count it again. In the corridor outside the bedchamber, the great house held its breath. Marlbridge slept the way an animal sleeps after a hunt, deep and self-satisfied and entirely without suspicion. Somewhere below, in the servants' wing, a kettle had been set, but it would not whistle for another quarter hour. Somewhere above, in the long gallery, the great clock kept its discipline ticking. Adelaide had walked the route so often in her mind that her feet found the runner without her looking. Past the gilt mirror she would not glance into, past the door of the room that had been hers for the first 3 nights, before he had stopped pretending. Past the portrait of the 3rd Duke, who had been painted holding a hunting hound and a peach, and who had always struck her as a man who had never been told no by anyone in his life. She did not look at him either. There was no time, and there was no reason. And there was also the matter that, 3 weeks ago, in the long gallery of this same house, his great-great-grandson had laughed. She had not been meant to hear it. She had been meant to be in the music room, where the other gentlemen's companions had been gathered for the afternoon, while the Duke and his particular set drank brandy out of season and traded the kind of confidences only safe men trade. She had been on her way there, in fact, with a book under her arm she had not been reading, because she did not need to read it. She had written half of it, when she had paused at the corner of the gallery because she had heard her name. Her false name, which was the same as her true first name, because she had not been able to bring herself to surrender that. Adelaide. "She's just for fun," the Duke had said. "Cortwin? Oh no, she's amusing. She has a mouth on her, which is novel. But for God's sake, gentlemen, do you imagine I would actually keep her? She is a diversion, a perfectly pleasant diversion. By autumn, I will have forgotten her shoes." There had been laughter. Easy, careless laughter. The kind that did not even consider whether the laughed at might be listening. One of them had asked what she was good for then, and another had answered, and the answer had been crude in the courteous way crude men learn to be crude when they have been to good schools. The Duke had not joined in that part. She had noticed even then, in the cold hollow underneath her ribs, that he had not joined in that part. He had only laughed once, briefly, at the beginning. After that, he had let the others carry it. She had stood in the corridor with the book under her arm, and she had not cried. She had thought, with a clarity that had surprised her, that she had a few seconds to decide who she was going to be. She could be the woman who walked into the room and let her face show what she had heard. She could be the woman who walked away to her chamber and wept into the bedding she had not chosen. She could be the woman who continued on to the music room and smiled at the gentleman's companions and accepted a cup of tea and made a joke at her own expense. She had chosen the third. Not because she was brave, because she was not yet ready to lose. That had been 3 weeks ago. In those 3 weeks, she had done a number of useful things, all of them quietly. She had copied 2 pages out of a ledger that should not have been left open on a desk in a house where a woman with a head on her shoulders was sleeping. She had written to a person in the city who owed her father a kindness and would, she believed, repay it to his daughter. She had counted, on her fingers, under the table at dinner, the number of times the Duke's steward had used the word arrangement when speaking to a particular merchant in the front hall, and she had concluded that the number was one too many for any of it to be innocent. She had also, and this was the part she did not like to look at directly, allowed herself to be loved a little more carefully than she had intended. That was not in the plan. The plan had been to be amused and to be useful and to leave. The plan had not accounted for the way he poured the water. At the foot of the great staircase, she paused. She had told herself she would not, and she did, because there are promises a person makes to themselves at 3 a.m. that the same person cannot keep at 4. She set the case down. She listened. The house breathed. From the kitchens came the small, homely clink of a copper pot being set on a hook by a woman who had been awake since before any of them. From the gardens came nothing, because the gardens were holding their breath as well. From the bedchamber above her came no footstep, no stir, only the steady silence of a man who slept the way men sleep when they have not yet been told what they stand to lose. She thought, he will read the letter. He will read it before the kettle whistles. He will read it and he will not understand the half of it, because I have not told him the half of it, because the half of it is not yet mine to tell. He will think I have left because I overheard him. He will think I have left because my pride was wounded. He will be partly right, and the part of him that is partly right will be relieved. Because a wounded pride is a thing a man like him knows how to soothe with a bracelet and a carriage. He will not yet know about the ledger. He will not yet know about the merchant. He will not yet know about the brown ribbon in the case at my feet. He will not yet know that I am the granddaughter of a man whose name, spoken in the right room in the city, will close 3 doors he had counted on remaining open. He will know all of that by noon. By noon, he will know who I am. By evening, he will know what I have done with what I learned in his house. And by tomorrow morning, if I have measured him correctly, he will be standing in a doorway somewhere, hat in hand, asking, in a voice he has never used in his life, for me to come back. She allowed herself, just for the count of 1 breath, to wonder whether she would. Then she lifted the case, and she crossed the marble of the entrance hall on the soft soles she had chosen for this hour, and she let herself out by the side door that opened onto the kitchen garden because the front door creaked. The latch made the smallest sound, a single click, the sound of a clock being wound. She closed it behind her without looking back. The gravel of the path bit into the leather of her boots. The air outside was colder than she had expected, and it carried the smell of bruised mint from the bed she had brushed against, and she thought, irrelevantly and with great precision, that the gardener had not yet been told to cut it back. She walked. The lane beyond the kitchen garden ran along the lower edge of the park and met the post road a quarter-mile down, where, if her letter to the city had been read by the right person at the right hour the previous afternoon, a hired chaise would be waiting for her under the alder trees. If it was not, she had been prepared to walk to the village. She had counted the miles. She had counted also the coins in the inner pocket of her cloak, which were enough for a meal and a bed and a ticket onward, and not a penny more. Adelaide Cortwyn had been many things in her life, including, briefly and unwillingly, a duke's diversion. She had never been a woman who traveled without knowing the price of her next loaf of bread. The chaise was there. She saw the shape of it first, dark against the slightly less dark of the trees, and she heard the horse blow softly through its nose, a sound that, in the cold, formed a small white cloud of breath. The driver was a thin man, wrapped to the eyes in a muffler. He did not greet her. He did not need to. He inclined his head a quarter inch, which, in the language of men hired by the granddaughters of dangerous grandfathers, meant, "I know who sent you. I know who you are. Get in." She got in. The door shut. The chaise rocked once on its springs as the driver climbed to his seat. The horse, who had been waiting longer than was kind, stepped forward at the first chirrup without being asked twice. The wheels turned. The alder trees fell behind. Marlbridge House, 3 stories of pale stone set into a hollow of beech and oak, fell behind also, with its long gallery and its third duke and its glass of half-poured water on a bedside table. And Adelaide, in the dim interior of the chaise, sat very straight and folded her hands in her lap, and did not permit herself any expression at all until the road turned and the house was gone from the window. Then, briefly, she allowed one. Not a tear. She had been raised better than that. A small movement at the corner of her mouth, downward. The kind of movement a person makes when she has tasted something she had not expected to taste and is deciding whether she will swallow it. She swallowed it. The post road in that part of the country ran along the top of a long, shallow ridge, and from the ridge, in daylight, one could see the river and the mill town and the smoke of the ironworks and, on a clear morning, the spire of the cathedral 15 miles off. In the dark before dawn, one could see only the lamp at the front of the chaise, swinging on its iron arm, throwing a yellow wedge of light onto the verge. Adelaide watched the wedge of light. She thought, because thinking was the only currency she had left herself, about the order of operations. The packet of papers in her case would go first. It would go to a man in the city named Pelham, who kept an office above a printer's shop on a narrow street whose name she had memorized as a child, along with her catechism. Pelham had loved her father, in the careful way men of that profession allowed themselves to love anyone, and Pelham owed her father a debt that had never been paid in coin, because it could not have been. She had written ahead. He would be expecting her by mid-morning. The papers would be in his keeping by noon, and copies would be made by 2, and by 3 the copies would be in the hands of 3 other people, whose names she would not write down even now, even to herself, because there were habits a person did not break. The ledger pages would not go to Pelham. The ledger pages would go, by an older route, to a woman in a house on the canal, whose name she also did not write down. That woman had been a friend of her mother's, and had been many other things besides, and was the only person in the city Adelaide trusted to know what to do with a column of figures that had been written by a steward who believed no one would ever count them. The letter on the candle dish in Marlbridge House would, by the time these things were done, have been read 4 times by the man it was addressed to. Once in confusion, once in disbelief, once in something that resembled anger, and once, finally, in a stillness she would have given a great deal to witness and would not. She knew him well enough now to know the order. She had not known him well enough 3 weeks ago to predict it. She had learned. It was, she thought, the single most expensive education she had ever undertaken. The chaise rocked gently. The horse was a good one. She could tell by the rhythm of the hooves, which fell in 4s and not in 3s, and by the way the driver had not yet had to speak to it. The lamp swung. The verge slid past, dark grass and darker hedge, and once a fox crossed the road ahead of them and paused in the wedge of light and looked at the chaise with the level, uninsulted gaze foxes give to things larger than themselves, and then went on about its business. Adelaide watched it go. She thought, that is the correct attitude. She thought, I will try to remember it. By the time the first gray came into the sky behind them, they had made 8 miles. The driver, who had not spoken at all, spoke now. He said, without turning his head, that they would stop at the wheat sheaf in Cold Harbor for the horse, and that there would be tea inside if she wanted it, and that there would also be a man at the bar who would not be looking at her, and that she was not to look at him either, and that all of this had been arranged. Adelaide said thank you. The driver did not answer. He had not been thanked in any meaningful sense for many years, and he had got out of the habit of acknowledging it. The wheat sheaf was a low stone building with a slate roof and a sign that had been repainted recently and badly. The yard was already awake. An ostler was leading out a pair of bays, and a maid in a striped apron was throwing the contents of a basin onto the cobbles. And a thin dog with one white ear was investigating the result. Adelaide stepped down from the chaise without assistance and walked into the inn the way her mother had taught her to walk into any room where she did not yet know who was watching, which was straight-backed, unhurried, and with her gloves still on. The man at the bar did not look at her. She did not look at him. She ordered tea and a roll, and she sat at a small table near the window where she could see the yard. And she watched the driver and the ostler change the horse with the economy of men who had done it 1,000 times. The tea was strong and bitter, and exactly what she needed. The roll was warm. She ate it in small bites, because a woman who bolts her food in a strange inn is a woman who has not slept, and she did not yet wish to advertise that she had not slept. While she ate, she allowed herself, for the first time since the candle dish, to think about him. Not about the laugh. The laugh was finished. The laugh had been paid for already, and the price had been 3 weeks of her life, and a small permanent adjustment to the way she would, in future, decide which rooms to enter. The laugh was done. She thought, instead, about the night before, about the way he had come into the room late because he had been writing letters, and about the way he had stopped in the doorway and looked at her for a long moment without speaking, and about the way she had pretended to be already asleep so that she would not have to look back. He had crossed to the bed. He had sat on the edge of it. He had not touched her. He had said her name, quietly, twice, in the voice he used only when he believed no one was listening, and when she had not answered, he had not pressed it. He had risen. He had poured the glass of water. He had set it on the table. He had blown out the candle in the sconce by the door and left the one on the dish because she did not like full dark, a fact she had mentioned exactly once in his hearing 4 nights previously, and which he had, apparently, retained. Then he had got into the bed beside her, and he had been careful not to disturb the coverlet over her shoulder, and he had gone to sleep with one hand resting, lightly, against the small of her back, as though to be sure she was still there. She had lain awake under that hand for an hour. She had thought, with the part of her that was a daughter of her father, that a man who laughed in a long gallery and slept with his hand against the small of a woman's back was a man who did not yet know what he believed. She had thought, with the part of her that was simply a woman of 23 who had not asked for any of this, that it was unkind of him to be both of those men at once. Then she had risen. Then she had written the letter. Then she had counted to 3. The tea grew cool in the cup. The driver appeared at the door of the inn and inclined his head a 1/4 inch again. Adelaide rose. She left a coin on the table that was exactly the price of the tea and the roll, and a small kindness to the maid, and not a penny more. She walked out into the yard. The new horse, a gray, was already harnessed and impatient. She climbed back into the chaise. The door shut. The wheels turned. Cold Harbor fell behind them. Slate roof and badly painted sign, and thin dog with the white ear. And the road climbed on to the next ridge, and the gray light grew, by small increments, into the beginning of a morning. At Marlbridge House at that same hour, the kettle in the servants' wing whistled. A maid carried hot water up the back stairs. A second maid laid a fire in the breakfast room. The steward, who rose early, read his correspondence in his small office off the pantry, and noticed nothing yet, because the post had not come. In the bedchamber on the second floor, the Duke of Marlbridge stirred, reached, and found nothing where there had been something. He opened his eyes. He looked first at the coverlet, which was smooth in the side where she had been, and then at the table, where the glass of water stood exactly as he had left it. He sat up. He did not call for anyone. He was, in matters of self-control, a man who had been trained from boyhood. And the first thing he did, before anything else, was to look around the room for evidence, because he had been raised to gather evidence before he acted. He saw the candle dish. He saw the corner of the letter under it. He did not, at first, move to take it. He sat on the edge of the bed in his shirt, and he looked at the letter the way a man looks at a door he has not yet opened. And he understood, in the wordless way men of his kind understand things they have refused to know, that the contents of the letter were going to rearrange the morning. He reached out. He lifted the dish. He took the letter. He unfolded it. It was very short. Adelaide had been raised to write short letters when the matter was serious. It said only this: I heard you in the gallery on the 15th. I have taken from your house only what was already mine, and nothing of yours that you valued. By midday, a number of people in the city will know things they did not know yesterday. They will not have learned them from me. They will have learned them from records you yourself caused to be kept. I am not angry. I am not, any longer, even particularly surprised. Do not come after me. If by some chance you decide that you wish to, do not come with flowers. Come with the truth about the arrangement in the front hall. Bring it in your own hand. Then we shall see. Yours, with more regret than is convenient. A. He read it once. He read it a second time. He set it down on the coverlet, very carefully, as though it might cut him if handled wrongly. He rose. He crossed to the window. He drew the curtain aside. The drive below was empty. The morning was gray. A blackbird on the lawn declined to comment. He stood there for a long time. His hand rested against the cold pane. He did not yet know about the ledger. He did not yet know about Pelham in the city, or about the woman on the canal, or about the brown ribbon. He did not yet know that the granddaughter of a man whose name he had been taught as a boy to speak with the careful neutrality reserved for opponents one had not yet measured, had spent 3 weeks in his house counting the times his steward used the word arrangement. He did not yet know any of it. He knew, however, that he had laughed. He had laughed in the gallery on the 15th. He remembered now, with the unwelcome clarity of a man who had been trained to remember details, exactly what he had said. He had said she was just for fun. He had said it because the men around him were the kind of men to whom one said such things, and because he had not yet admitted, even to himself, that it was no longer true. And because the easiest way to keep a thing from being looked at directly is to laugh at it once, briefly, and let the others carry the rest. He had let the others carry the rest. He remembered also that he had not joined the cruder part. He remembered being faintly proud of himself at the time for that small abstention. He understood now, in the cold light of an empty drive, that the small abstention was not going to be enough. He turned from the window. He rang for his man. He dressed without speaking. He went down the back stairs, not the front, because he did not yet wish to be seen by his own household in the condition in which he found himself, which was a condition for which the language of his class had no word that did not also sound like weakness. He went into his study. He closed the door. He sat at his desk. He did not light the lamp, although the morning was still gray enough to want it. He sat in the half-dark, and he looked at the row of ledgers on the shelf opposite. And he understood, slowly, which of them she would have read, and which page she would have copied, and what that page in the wrong hands in the city would by noon have begun to do. By noon, the letter had said. By noon, a number of people would know. He looked at the clock on the mantel. It was 7:15. He had, he calculated, perhaps 4 hours in which to decide what kind of man he was going to be for the rest of his life. He sat very still in his chair, the way she had sat very still in the chaise, and he thought, with a precision he had not previously applied to any matter concerning himself, about the order of operations. The chaise, by then, had crossed the river at Marling Bridge and turned south onto the city road. The gray horse had been changed for a chestnut at a small posting house whose name Adelaide did not catch because the driver had not told her and she had not asked. The morning had filled in around them, soft and damp, the sky the color of unbleached linen. Adelaide, in the dim interior, had begun to permit herself small, unguarded movements. She had loosened the strap on the case at her feet. She had taken off one glove and flexed the fingers underneath, because her hand had gone stiff from being held too tightly closed against her knee. She had let her shoulders, just slightly, drop. She thought about Pelham. She thought about the brown ribbon. She thought, also, against her better judgment, about the glass of water on the bedside table, and about the hand at the small of her back. She thought, I will not think of that again until this is finished. She thought, I will allow myself to think of it once more on the night this is finished, and then I will decide what to do with it. The chaise rolled on. The city ahead of them lay under a low brown smudge of its own smoke. Somewhere in that smudge, on a narrow street above a printer's shop, a man named Pelham was setting out 2 cups and a pot of tea, because he had received a letter the previous afternoon, and he was a man who, when he had been told a thing, prepared for it. Somewhere on the canal, a woman who had been a friend of her mother's was unlocking the small writing desk by the window. Somewhere in a coffee house near the exchange, a clerk who had been paid 6 months ago by an old man who had foreseen this kind of morning was unfolding a list of names and reading it over breakfast. Adelaide in the chaise took a long breath. It came easier than she had expected. She had been holding for 3 weeks a great many things she had not known the weight of until she set them down. She had set them down on a candle dish in a bedchamber in Marlbridge House. She had walked out by the kitchen garden in the cold. She had counted to 3. She was not, she thought, a woman who had been wronged. She was a woman who had been underestimated, which was a different and a more useful thing. By midday, she would no longer be either. By midday, she would be a woman whose name had been spoken in 3 rooms in the city by men who had not known the night before that they would need to speak it. By midday, she would be the granddaughter, openly, of the grandfather she had been keeping in reserve. By midday, the Duke of Marlbridge, who at the present hour was sitting in a half-dark study counting his ledgers, would understand that the diversion he had laughed about in his long gallery had been a woman who had walked into his house with a list and a memory and a particular interest in one column of figures, and had walked out of it with all 3 intact and with one thing more she had not planned to acquire and had not yet decided what to do with. The chaise approached the first of the toll gates. The driver slowed. Adelaide drew her cloak more closely around her shoulders, not for warmth, but because it was the gesture of a woman who had arrived somewhere, and she wished, when she stepped down, to look like a woman who had arrived. She glanced once, briefly, at the case at her feet. The strap was loose, the leather worn pale at the corners, the buckle her father had fastened catching the gray light. Inside it, among the linen and the comb and the map and the brown ribbon, the silver thimble lay in its small twist of paper. She did not need to see it. She knew where it was. She had known where it was every minute of the last 3 weeks. She thought of the Duke, briefly, the way one thinks of a person standing in another room of a building one has already left. She thought, by tomorrow morning, if I have measured you correctly, you will be standing in a doorway somewhere asking me to stay. She thought, I have not yet decided what I will say. She thought, that is, on the whole, a more honest position than the one I held last night. The toll gate opened. The chaise moved forward. The city took her in, and there, for the moment, we will leave her. And we will leave him. And we will leave the letter on the coverlet and the glass of half-poured water on the bedside table, and the blackbird on the lawn that declined to comment, because there is more to come, and we have all the time in the world to come to it. Pull the blanket a little higher. Let the fire settle. If you have ever been called a small thing by someone who had not yet understood that you were not, if you have ever stood in a corridor and heard yourself laughed about and decided, in the space of 3 seconds, who you were going to be, if you have ever walked out of a warm room before dawn with a case at your side and a letter behind you and a count of your own coins in your pocket, then you already know the shape of Adelaide's morning, and you already know what the Duke of Marlbridge had not yet learned, which is that the people we have not bothered to see clearly are very often the people whose names we will later be obliged to say with care. Tell me, when the fire is lower, which moment stayed with you? Was it the glass of water poured half full because he had remembered? Was it the candle dish and the folded letter? Was it the fox in the wedge of lamplight, looking at the chaise with the level, uninsulted gaze of a creature who knew exactly its own size? Stay a while by this fire. There will be another story when this one is done, and another after that, and a chair kept for you each time. For now, rest. The kettle is on. The night is long. And somewhere, on a road south of a great pale house, a woman in a worn leather case is being carried toward a morning she has spent 3 weeks earning. And a man in a half-dark study is learning, at last, the price of a single, careless laugh. Sleep gently. We will meet again by this same fire.